Hi and welcome. We're going to be looking at the first Sound Fluency assessment, also known as FSF. FSF measures the ability to isolate the first sounds in a word. This assessment is given BOY and MOY kindergarten, and you can progress this assessment as needed for even students outside of that benchmark range. This assessment is an auditory assessment. In this assessment, the assessor says a word and the student responds with the first sound. For example, if you're looking at the word crab as you see on the screen, the student would be able to identify k or k. Both things will be accepted within this assessment because the student was able to identify sounds at the beginning of the word. It is considered more higher order if the student can isolate the very first sound as opposed to the first group of sounds, but points are given for both items. This shows you the scoring for SFF. It shows you that the student gets more points because it is a more higher order skill to be able to isolate that very first sound, the initial phoneme. But the student also gets credit for telling you the first initial group of sounds, like you see here on the screen. The FSF reminders, the ones that you can give as needed throughout the assessment, is if a student appears to have forgotten the directions, you can tell them, remember to tell me the first sound you hear in the word, and then immediately say the next word. One time you can say to the student, if the student says a letter name, you can say to them, remember to tell me the first sound in the word, not the letter name. But that's only one time reminder. Now I'm going to show you a demonstration of how to conduct the FSF assessment. Okay, we're going to take a look at the first Sound Fluency assessment. The first thing you're going to see after you click the blue button beside FSF on the assessment selection screen will be this screen here that says reminders. This will give you all the reminders one time and anytime that you can say to the student during the assessment. After a few assessments you may have memorized these. I like to keep them up as a continual reminder, but you can take them off with taking off the check mark there if you wish. Once you're ready to proceed, click the blue button down at the bottom right, and it will take you to this page here. Here you will see Mr. Say, and Mr. Say gives you the words that you should say verbatim to the student. You should not veer from these words. You should say them exactly as they are on the screen to the student. Up here in the right hand corner you're going to see a little eye. This here will send you back to the reminders so that you can see those again if you need them during the assessment. And then you'll see an up arrow which will either take you to the page previous or out of the assessment depending on what part you are on during the assessment. What I would start here with is the directions that Mr. Say asked me to give to the student. So I would say, listen to me say this word, man. The first sound that you hear in the word man is Listen, man. What is the first sound you hear in the word man? And here it gives you what the student should respond with, or meh. At this point, you would, if they gave you these responses, you would click correct. And then it gives you the response that you give to the student. Good, is the first sound you hear in the word man. And you're going to click the blue arrow down at the bottom to go to the next sample. This sample says, listen to me say another word, moon. What is the first sound you hear in the word moon? And it gives you some samples of what the student should say correctly. Now if the student gets it incorrect, you would click incorrect, and it's going to give them a little bit more direction just to be sure they understand what they're supposed to do in the assessment. Hopefully at that point they would get it correct, and you would click correct. Then it's going to give you one more sample, and if that student gets it correct, you click correct, and it gives you a response that you give to the student. Then it's going to move you on to the directions to begin the assessment. Here Mr. Say tells you to say, now I am going to say more words. You tell me the first sound you hear in the word. The purple words you see here are the actions that you provide for the student. So here it tells you to say the first word on the screen and tap or click start. So you're going to say the words you see on the screen previous to tapping the word start. So when you are ready and the student is ready, click begin down at the bottom right. In order to begin the assessment, remember you say the word up here in the top left. In this case, it's the word knob. I would say that out loud. And immediately I need to be sure that I press the blue start button in the middle for the timer to begin. So I had already said the word knob. Now I'm going to record the student's response. If they said I'm going to click the N mark there for 2 points. If they said nah, I would click the second one here for 1 point. If they gave me any other response, I would click 0 for 0 points because it would be considered incorrect. In the right hand corner, you're going to see 3 diamonds that light up blue. This is your hesitation. If the student hesitates for 3 seconds, you will then move them on to the next word and count it as 0 points. This is your timer. At 55 seconds, your screen will turn yellow to indicate that your time is almost up. And this is a 60-second probe. Down in the bottom right, you'll see the next word that the student is to tell you the beginning sound for. So you would say the word aloud as you click on it. So I would say jam. And then as the student gives a response, I'm going to click the response depending on what they tell me. As you just saw, the screen turned yellow, so I know my time is almost up. Once it turns back to white, I can click done. At this point, however, the assessment is over and I can make no further corrections. If I remember that I messed up on a previous word, I can click the back arrow and it will take me to the word that I had before that, and I can make a correction. Once you make the correction or the assessment is complete, you click done. And at this point, it takes you to the results screen where you will see the results of the assessment. You can go to the review tab to review the words to see what they got correct and what they got incorrect, and you can mark patterns and motivation. Now that you have seen FSF, here are common scoring rules that you may want to remember. The first one is if the student self-corrects, you can tap the correct 1 or 2 point response again, and it will turn it green to indicate that it's self-corrected. You need to think about how a student says things on a regular basis in the classroom, whether they have a certain articulation or a dialect. If you know that they're saying the correct sound, because that's how they normally say it in the classroom, then you may count it correct. For hesitation rule, after 3 seconds, you're going to tap the 0 mark and then move them on to the next word. If a student receives 0 points in the first 5 words, the device will prompt you to discontinue the assessment. Here are some common scoring rules, just a little bit further detail on that. For correct sounds, you can select the first sound or group of sounds that matches the student's response. Now, you're going to give students credit for producing the initial sound or sounds, even if they go on to segment all the sounds in the word or repeat the word. So you're looking for what did they first tell you, and you indicate that. For any incorrect sounds, you just tap the incorrect box. So if the score response is incorrect when the student provides anything other than the 1 correct responses that are listed in the screen. Now for speech and articulation, you're going to count common articulation errors correct if part of the student's normal speech pattern, just like we said earlier, if it's something they commonly do in the classroom and you know that that is how they say that particular sound, then that can be counted as correct, and it shows you some examples there on the screen. We do not penalize a student who typically makes these substitutions in everyday speech. Here are some quick references for correct and incorrect procedure as far as FSF assessment goes. On this assessment, when you are looking at the results screen, you will see that there are some additional things that you can check. You can check the patterns box for things that they have done over and over throughout the assessment you want to make note of. You also can check the motivation box and indicate whether the student was motivated for the assessment, was uninterested, was focused, just to keep a note of whether they were having a good or bad response to the assessment. And you can also invalidate the assessment. However, that's only in an emergency case only, because we want to be sure we get the student's first indication of what they know. Here are a few points to remember for FSF. The student receives 2 points for identifying the initial phoneme in isolation. The student receives 1 point for identifying the first group of sounds, and FSF is an indicator of an early phonemic awareness skill.